Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, getting you ready for the NFL Draft, which is set to begin April 23rd, Las Vegas, Nevada, right in front of those Bellagio fountains. It's going to be epic. This is the post-combine edition. That's right. Last weekend, players really took center stage at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Indiana. 337 total collegiate players were invited to the combine, their biggest job interview of their lives. And I'll tell you what, I remember the draft when I was growing up. I remember waking up early on a Saturday to watch the first round of the draft. And now day one is on a Thursday, prime time. Day two, you're talking about, the second and third rounds on Friday, followed up by the draft there on Saturday. Really a 3-day event. And the combine, no different. The combine was normally one that a lot of the scouts and coaches would get up early, and combine would be there in the morning. Now they have a prime time event, if you will, for the combine. And yes, you had the 4 days, and normally they have the running backs and the offensive line and special teams go day one. Well, they kind of flipped it a little bit. Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa, we knew weren't going to compete at the combine, but they still wanted the quarterbacks, the receivers, the tight ends to go day number one, really set the tone. And when you're talking about drama, you're talking about the competition, Justin Herbert-Jordan Love, what were they going to do at the quarterback position? That's really at the crux of things, what they wanted to see there on day one. We're going to get into all of that. We're going to see who really stood out at the combine. Who are the winners? Who are some of the guys that need to really prove themselves in their pro day to really make up some ground? Who are the guys that sent coaches back to watch more game film? Because that's really what the combine is all about. You want to verify and validate what you saw on the game film. And I'll tell you, I enjoy the combine. I put out my first mock draft in February. And now that we have more of an elongated pre-draft process, it used to be a lot more compact. Now we have the combine end of February. The draft isn't until the end of April. I like to put an initial mock draft out in February and then wait until the combine hits. So some of my material on the website might be a little dated, but it's by design because I really want to see what happens at the combine. I want to see who are the players that are moving up draft boards, who are the guys that might end up falling out of round number one. And the next mock draft really doesn't get going until we get into free agency, because we can have all kinds of discussions, conjecture about who's going to be going where. But at the end of the day, we really don't know what the mindset of these teams are going to be. We want to see what happens in free agency, because look, the New York Football Giants need a right tackle. They've got to protect Daniel Jones, their investment. What if they take a right tackle in free agency? Mike Remmers is gone. What happens if they take the right tackle in free agency? Well, my prediction that they're taking Jedrick Wills from Alabama, number 4 overall, that goes out the window. So, same goes for Arizona. We're talking all this talk about Larry Fitzgerald in his he's coming back for 2020, but we still have to find a number 1 target to replace Larry Fitz for Kyler Murray. How about we protect Kyler Murray? I know that they're interested in they were trying to bring in Jack Conklin. It sounds like Jack Conklin might be going to the Jets. So what does Arizona do there at number 8? Do they go for the receiver? The receiving class, that draft class, we know is special and it's really deep. The offensive line, you've got some freakish offensive tackles, some guys that are really making waves at the top of the draft board. That's who you really want to target. You could wait until round number 2, but there isn't as much depth in this offensive tackle class as you have with the receivers. So free agency will kind of flush some of that out. And then we'll kind of get into really looking at top 10 players and really getting position by position, getting some of those breakdowns, who's going to be going where. who are the first round receivers, who might fall to the second, who are guys who are normally day 2 picks that because of the depth of this draft class might be falling and could be steals for your NFL team somewhere in the middle to late day 3. There are going to be those receivers that are going to be out there that are going to end up being steals in the 5th, 6th, and possibly even 7th round. We're going to go ahead and take a look at that throughout this pre-draft process. And I'm telling you what, now that we've got the combine out of the way, we're going to have some podcasts fast and furious. Every few days, there's going to be another podcast from Ready for the Draft podcast because I really want to make sure you're ready for that NFL draft. I want to make sure that we're taking a look at some of the pro days. We want to make sure that, who's really making a late push. We want to see where the teams, where are the team needs and who are going to be the best fit for those team needs. We're going to be breaking all of that down. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into day 1 of this combine, shall we? I want to make sure that I at least bring my post-combine mock draft. We'll go ahead and take a look at the top half of the first round before we get out of here. But I really want to focus on the combine first. And when you look at the combine, day 1, obviously the quarterbacks, the tight ends were the ones that took the field first, but I kind of want to start with the quarterbacks and Justin Herbert and Jordan Love, obviously the top 2 quarterback prospects sitting there. Justin Herbert out of Oregon, big kid. I mean, 6'6", 236 pounds. I mean, you want to talk about a kid who just looked like a man out there. He absolutely did that and made his presence felt early and often, with his size. But I'll tell you what, the athleticism was really on display as well. Jordan Love decided not to run the 40. Justin Herbert ran a 4.68. So the athleticism absolutely on display there from Justin Herbert. And a 35.5-inch vertical leap as well. The only guy who jumped higher than that was Cole McDonald. And really, Justin Herbert did nothing to dissuade anybody about him being the number 3 quarterback in this draft. There are some NFL executives who have been talking to some of the insiders on ESPN, NFL Network, saying that there's a chance that, Justin Herbert could end up being the best quarterback in this draft class. Everyone's talking about Justin Herbert and his introvertedness and about how he wants to learn to be a better leader, that introverted extrovert, I guess, and be a better leader. But what everyone has been saying at the combine and at the Senior Bowl was that the fact that guys were gravitating to him. And it's one of those things to where teams see that. You have to see that. I mean, it's hard not to. And that's one of the things that I don't have the benefit of not being at the combine, but being able to see how some of these players interact. And Justin Herbert, the fact that guys were drawn to him definitely bodes well for any talk about him as a leader. I think there's no question that Justin Herbert can lead. He stepped in as a freshman, and what he did out on the field really turned heads as a freshman. He was the first true freshman to start at Oregon since 1983, and in his second game as a starter, tied the school record with 6 touchdown passes. And then the following week, accounted for a school record 512 total yards, also tied Bill Musgrave's record for passing from 1989 with 489 passing yards. So the 12 touchdowns in a 3-game span, equal marks set by 2 quarterbacks taken in the top 3 of the draft. Joey Harrington in 2000 and Marcus Mariota with the Ducks in 2012. So Justin Herbert burst onto the scene. He battled some injuries his first couple of years, but as a junior, the accuracy, completion percentage dropped a little bit. And really as a senior, Mario Cristobal leaned on his quarterback for some veteran leadership, but really Mario Cristobal, he's a former offensive lineman. So when you're talking about the Pac-12, you're talking about the way that they like to spread it around and air it out. A lot of these fast-paced offenses, Mario Cristobal wanted to change the attitude there with the Oregon Ducks. He had 5 large individuals there along that offensive line, led by Penei Sewell, who's going to be a top pick in next year's draft. You have all that offensive lineman. You have a couple of really good running backs, really a stable of running backs. If you include Cyrus Abibi-Likio to go along with Travis Dye and C.J. Verdell. And it was really the running game that took over. So when you're talking about Justin Herbert, you may say, well, yeah, he threw for 3,400 yards. The completion percentage is up, but only because he was throwing a lot of short passes. Look, he proved everyone, really kind of shut up all the doubters watching him at the combine. The way the effortlessness with the delivery, able to throw the ball down the field with accuracy, put the ball on the receivers. The receivers really didn't have to break stride. You saw the arm strength from him. Same thing though with Jordan Love. 6'4", 224 pounds, 35.5-inch vertical leap. The thing with Jordan Love is, he made everything look so easy. He was so calm, and you look at his face and, nothing rattles this guy. You saw that out on the field. You saw that again at the combine, and this is a guy, he gets beaten up. I beat him up over a lot of his stats, the fact that he had the 17 interceptions. But look, when it comes down to it, 9 new offensive starters. He had 5 of his top receiving targets were gone. That included his tight end, Dax Raymond. That included Ronquavian Tarver, his number 1 wideout. That also included his running back, Darwin Thompson, who played in the Super Bowl. And not to mention, new head coach, new offensive coordinator. Matt Wells was out, went to Texas Tech. In comes Gary Anderson. So there was a lot on this kid's plate that he was having to deal with. And look, I kind of downplayed the same situation for Josh Allen. And really looking back on it, you see what Josh Allen's been able to do with the Bills in a short period of time. I should have given more credence to the argument that, look, he had some talented receivers that he lost and a running back as well. But look, he didn't have a 60% completion percentage when he did have these guys. And so then when he lost them, I looked at it a little bit differently, that look, Josh Allen completion percentage was a huge issue. I think when you look at Jordan Love a season ago, 64% completion percentage, this year 61.9. It's really, in 2018, 32 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. And then in 2019, 20 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. Now, going to the whiteboards and having to really talk to coaches and the interviews, he's going to have, he had to answer to that. What was going on? Really, in terms of what were you thinking with a lot of the throws? And I think he felt the pressure and he was trying to force and create too many plays. What does that look like at the next level with the NFL? Is he going to be in that same situation? Is this a kid who can, stay calm in the pocket and not have to worry about, pressing or doing too much? That's why I give the nod to Justin Herbert. Neither one of these guys, they both showed off, really, some excellent arm strength, showed off the athleticism. But I just think that Justin Herbert, the maturity that's there, I think he's going to be more NFL ready right now. I'm looking at I almost did it. The Los Angeles Chargers. Phillip Rivers is gone. You have Tyrod Taylor sitting there. They're going to need a quarterback. And really, this is where you're going to watch the off season, because are they going to go, they've already traded Russell Okung for Trey Turner. It's going to end up being final, around when free agency begins. But Russell Okung going to Carolina, question marks abound with the offensive line as it was. Right tackle Sam Tevy, they need an upgrade. Whoever's going to be playing quarterback. So if they don't go with a quarterback in free agency, I still think this has to be a quarterback. And I'm not ready to jump on the Jordan Love bandwagon. I think Justin Herbert's going to end up being the guy right there. But they didn't do anything to really dissuade anybody there. When you look at the quarterbacks, I thought Jalen Hurts did pretty well there at the combine, showed that he can make some of the throws. 6'1", 222, 4'5", 940. Showed off some pretty good athleticism overall. Obviously, when you're talking about beyond Herbert and Love, who's going to be the next quarterback taken? I thought Jacob Eason really showed off a big arm, 6'6", 231, ran a 4.8, 940. But here's a guy, I don't think he's overly mobile. I think he's one of those guys who's going to be more of a pocket passer. And what I worry about is you talk about these guys with these cannons for arms, and everyone just talks about the arm strength. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't have all the athleticism. I think he still has some work to do in terms of throwing the football. He only has one speed, and it's basically a bullet. So he's got to work on, that touch and being able to lay it into a receiver, because right now he doesn't put enough air under the ball. And as a result, he's overshooting his guys and not really allowing the receivers to run under the football. He looked pretty good at the combine overall with his arm strength. That's obviously on display. But when you get into game situations, that's really going to be the biggest key. When you look at the rest of the quarterbacks, I thought Jake Luton looked really good, throwing the football, getting the ball to the outside, showed off some arm strength. He's 6'6", so doesn't have that 6'7" moniker anymore. 6'6", 224 there out of Oregon State. I thought Steven Montez out of Colorado, 6'4", 231, really good athlete. But the problem with Steven Montez is he was never able to put together consistent tape, and we saw more of that at the combine. Same goes for Nate Stanley. This was the guy, if you watch the USC game, he looked like he couldn't miss. But the problem with him, he's a guy who struggles with deep ball accuracy and ball placement. And you saw that quite often at the combine. Throwing the ball behind some of the receivers, just some of the timing was off. And yes, you have to build up some of that chemistry and the timing with a lot of the receivers. But when you're there to try to set yourself apart, that really just played into his narrative all season long. And then with Cole McDonald, I thought his throwing motion was really the most concerning. I didn't really notice it as much at Hawaii, but he has this really long, elongated throwing motion, and that's going to be killer at the next level. I thought that he had all the tools there at Hawaii, learned from some of his mistakes, the 14 interceptions, most of them were at the beginning of the season, really finished on a tear. But when you have that elongated, throwing motion, that's going to get you into trouble. He's going to have to work on that. I think at his pro day, he's going to have to show that he can shorten up that motion. If he can't, then that's really going to impact his draft stock overall. So we'll get to the receivers in a minute, but when you look at the tight ends, I thought, tight ends not an overly impressive group on the whole, because you don't have a TJ Hawkinson, a Noah Fant, who's going to be a first round pick. But there are some nice players that are in this group, guys that I think you can find late on day 2, and then, quite a few day 3 tight ends. I thought that, my favorite player is Harrison Bryant. He's 6'5", 243, ran a 4.7 340. Not overly strong, only 13 reps in the bench press. But what you did see was they brought out the sled, and when he was hitting the sled, he was one of the guys who maintained leverage, didn't stand up with the sled, and actually stayed low and showed off an ability to keep his feet moving and really drive that sled down the field. That's really what it's designed to do. And you saw a lot of guys that were uncomfortable with it and wanted to stand straight up. And that's what happens with a lot of the bag work that you saw at the combine, was guys would get under the bag and then they would pop straight up and then they would drive the bag backwards. Can't really do that with the sled. And if you lose leverage, that's really what's going to happen. I thought Cole Kmet, let's get back to Harrison Bryant. I thought he showed really good hands. I thought the route running, very smooth and fluid athlete. I think he's going to get drafted a lot higher. I think he has a chance to be a day 2 guy. He's my favorite tight end. John Mackey Award winner as well, over 1,000 yards receiving in Lane Kiffin's offense there at Florida Atlantic. Another guy who I thought stood out was Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame. A lot of people talking about how stiff he is as a route runner and just as an athlete overall. 6'6", 262, ran a 4.7 40, 37-inch vertical leap. So he does show off some pretty good explosiveness. One of the slower times in the 3-cone drill, ran a 7.44. Only guy that was slower there was Charlie Taumapeo out of Portland State. So there is some stiffness in his hips. That's really what that 3-cone drill is going to flush out a little bit. If you remember all the talk about DK Metcalf in last year's draft, because that time was a lot slower, I think that had a big reason to do with his draft stock dropping. So I think Cole Kmet, a guy who can run up the seam, may not be able to separate quite as much in his route running, but I thought showed his willingness to be a good blocker. Showed some pretty good leg drive with his blocking as well. And I thought he looked like a decent athlete overall. Going through the tight ends, Thaddeus Moss didn't work out. Turned out that he had a Jones fracture in his foot, so he wasn't able to work out, was having surgery. I think the guy that turned heads the most, at least in terms of his 40, was Albert Oweh-Bunam. 4.49 40. This guy also has 34 and an eighth inch arms. So you're talking about a really big wingspan at 6'5", 258. Oweh-Bunam couldn't stay healthy at Missouri, and that was one of the big problems. After a freshman year, double-digit touchdowns, he struggled to stay on the field after that, and it really hurt Drew Lock in his last season there in Columbia. But I look at Albert O, and Albert O can be a weapon in the red zone. You see the speed. You put him out there in the slot, or you can even split him out. He's going to present some mismatches there. Not known as much of a blocker. I think really the medicals are going to be key for him, but he's someone who can end up creeping into that fourth round range, because you're talking about somebody that you're looking at, with some legitimate speed. Sub 4.5. I mean, you're talking about getting into category like Evan Ingram. But a lot of the tight ends, when you're talking about, George Kittle ran a 4.62. 4.52. Rob Gronkowski was on the slower end, ran a 4.68. But when you talk, Travis Kelce was a 4.61. So a lot of the tight ends were running in the between the 4.5s to 4.6 range, and we didn't see a ton of tight ends running in that area. One of the guys that I was expecting to run a lot faster was Hunter Bryant out of Washington, 6'2", 248. So he's an undersized tight end, ran a 4.74. When you're talking about Evan Ingram running in the 4.4s, he's a 6'2" tight end who was able to move out into the slot and create a lot of mismatches, and was a weapon for Eli Manning in that Giants passing attack. So for Hunter Bryant, he showed off, his ability to catch passes. That he's a bigger type receiver. Looked pretty good and pretty comfortable in a lot of the routes and in some of the drills. But I thought that time really was kind of, was discouraging a little bit, because I thought his play speed was a lot faster. So I think that could definitely impact his draft stock. I think when you're talking about the 40, one guy whose draft stock definitely took a hit was Jared Pinkney, 6'4", 257. He's not going to be the most explosive athlete, but he struggled with his production in 2019. The Vanderbilt offense really struggled to get anything going, but then he comes out to the combine and runs a 4.96. Really the slowest among the tight ends who ran the 40. And so that's going to definitely be concerning. You look at a guy like Jared Pinkney, I think he's one of the better blockers in this draft, but 4.96, there are offensive linemen that ran faster than a 4.96. So, that he's got his work cut out for him, especially at his pro day, to improve that. Other tight ends of note, I thought Bryson Hopkins, 6'4", 245, pretty good athlete, showed some pretty good bend. I thought he had, there's some fluidity to him that I really wasn't expecting to see. Ran a 4.66 as well, so he broke that 4.7 barrier, right around the Rob Gronkowski type range, and he's going to be somebody who I think is going to be in that third round discussion. I think you're talking about, Harrison Bryant, Cole Kmet. I think Bryson Hopkins has to be in that mix, because he's a guy who can stretch defenses up the seam. I think he can create a little bit of separation with his route running. And then he's really a good blocker. I think he really showed that at Purdue. One name to keep an eye out for is Virginia Tech's Dalton Keene. There's always going to be one of these guys. You think Foster Moreau, and you weren't really expecting to see, the type of athleticism and his ability to catch the football like you saw from him at the combine. Wound up translating to the next level, ended up having some decent games there for the Raiders in his rookie season. I look at Dalton Keene, 6'4", 253, a guy who really was more of like used as a fullback and an H-back type there for the Hokies. Ran a 4.71 40, and repped out 221 21 times in the bench press, and had a 34-inch vertical leap. This was a guy who I thought, he ran the 3-cone drill 707. One of the faster times. In fact, the only guy who ran a faster time was Adam Troutman, who we're going to get to in a minute. And I would say that, with Dalton Keene, he's going to be that sleeper. I think he's going to probably won't get drafted until probably the 6th round, but I think he absolutely is going to get drafted, and he's going to be one of those guys to keep an eye on. There's always one tight end that starts turning heads going, was not expecting that. I mean, George Kittle obviously, ran that 4.5, and everybody, really was surprised when he had the breakout season that he did with the 49ers, because he was a 5th round pick, but he wasn't really utilized in the passing game for Iowa. So that was really where heads started turning. I think Dalton Keene, he's not going to be the next George Kittle. He did run a 4.71, by the way, so it's not George Kittle type speed, but what I will say is I think Dalton Keene definitely helped himself at the combine. So speaking of Adam Troutman, mentioned him earlier, 6'5", 255, ran a 4.840. He looked like a man among boys there at Dayton, and a guy who I think is a tremendous pass catcher. He looked like he was straining quite a bit going through a lot of the drills. The 40 time, he really looked like he was straining going down the field there. But the fluidity with his his athleticism, ran a really good short shuttle. Among the fastest times there at a 4.27, but the 6.78 3-cone drill really shows that this is somebody who can sink his hips, can get in and out of his cuts, and that's going to be something. Maybe doesn't have the straight line speed that you're looking for, but a guy who can create separation, and that's really what you saw in the game film. This was a guy who was able to separate and get away from some of the linebackers and safeties there at the FCS level, and he may not be one of those speedsters. But Zach Ertz ran in the 4.7s when he was at the combine, and so I think with Adam Troutman, the route running ability, that's going to allow him to make plays at the next level. So those were the guys that really stood out for me at the combine. And I think those are going to be some of the guys that you're going to be talking about first and foremost at the draft. They're most likely on day 3, but I think when you're talking about Kmet, you're talking about Hopkins, and you're talking about Harrison Bryant, I think those guys have a shot to be mentioned at the end of day 2. So let's get to the receivers, shall we? I mean, the receivers, this was a lot of fun to watch. We were on the John Ross watch when Henry Ruggs took the field. Now, Henry Ruggs, just to put it out there, he ran a 4.27, ended up with a leg strain, leg muscle strain, and so that knocked him out of the rest of the combine. But Henry Ruggs, there was video that ended up surfacing on social media of him throwing down a dunk, had a 42-inch vertical leap. So this absolute athlete there, and I think he solidified his status as a top 3 receiver. In my book, at least. I think, when you look at that, CeeDee Lamb is my number 1. And I look at CeeDee Lamb, this is a guy who can do a little bit of everything. Ran a 4.540, didn't do anything there to really dissuade anybody about him as the number 1 wideout. 34.5-inch vertical leap. He's right in line with a lot of the receivers who are some of the number 1 wideouts there at the next level. He's somebody who is so physical after the catch, and the hands, he's very confident with his hands. You watch him in a lot of the drills, a lot of the late hands on some of the vertical routes, his ability to track the ball over his shoulder on the corner routes and up the seam, and his go route I thought was tremendous. Had the play of the day with his ability to extend for the football as he was going out of bounds. And I think CeeDee Lamb is definitely going to be in that conversation with Jerry Jeudy. Another guy who ran a 4.4540 at 6'1", 193. So one of the faster receivers in this draft class, 35-inch vertical leap. The 4.45, everyone talked about him being quicker than fast, but I think the 4.45 shows that he can take the top off of a defense a little bit as well. I think what you're looking at is Lamb, Jeudy, and Henry Ruggs, in that order. But I'll tell you a guy who's really rising draft stock because of what he's done in the postseason, and that's Denzel Mims out of Baylor, 6'3", 207, and ran a 4.38 at the combine, 38.5-inch vertical leap. If you tuned in and watched any of the Senior Bowl, this was a guy who was making the flair for the acrobatic, making catches in the back of the end zone, getting late separation over the corner. But I'll tell you, it was the blocking. You watched how physical he was. He beat up Lavert Hill on the perimeter with his perimeter blocking. Very dominant blocker. And the fact that he ran 4.38, and he's 6'3", really is, that is going to send him up draft boards. This is a guy who I think is really getting himself into round 2 consideration, and a guy who has to be moving up draft boards. He's moving up mine, and really surprised me with the speed. Another guy who surprised me with speed was Justin Jefferson out of LSU, 6'1", 202. I think everyone was expecting him to run in the 4.5s, probably mid 4.5 range. People were talking about, well, is he really going to be a guy who can take the top off of a defense? But I was watching, a lot of the game film, and this guy was getting open down the field and was getting separation from some of the better corners in the SEC. And we found out why. Justin Jefferson runs a 4.43. And then the 37.5-inch vertical leap. So we know that he can, that he can high point some footballs, but that also shows off the lower body explosiveness. And I'm telling you what, Justin Jefferson, man, you just solidified yourself as a first rounder. Whether it's the Bills or the Eagles, I think, or even New Orleans. I think Justin Jefferson, there are 3 teams right there in the bottom half of round number 1, and that's where Justin Jefferson is going to go. I'm convinced of that that's exactly where you're going to see Justin Jefferson come off the board. I thought, John Hightower of Boise State, 6'1", 189, ran a 4.43 40. This is a guy who, for me, I thought he was a good receiver. I didn't think he was a great receiver there at Boise State, but at the same time, 51 catches, 943 yards. That's 18.5 yards per reception, 8 touchdowns. And was a good receiver, or I'm sorry, a good return man as well. Returned a punt for a touchdown. When you look at the punt returns, kickoff returns, had 36 kickoff returns, averaged 23.3 yards per return, and took one back to the house this past season. I think John Hightower at 6'2", this is somebody who could very well sneak his way into the second day consideration because of what he was able to do out there, showing off some of his speed. Man, as we go through the list, who else really helped themselves? Donovan Peoples-Jones. Holy cow! You talk about a guy who's explosive. Ran a 4.48 40, but the 44.5-inch vertical leap. And then 139 inch broad jump. This is a guy who, when you talk about the lower body explosiveness, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones, he was somebody who really didn't have the benefit of stellar quarterback play. There's another guy that we're going to talk about next after this, but I was expecting around a 4.48, was not expecting to see the 44.5-inch vertical leap. I think he solidified himself as a day 2 pick as well. Jalen Reagor out of TCU, 5'11", 206. Looks like he put on some weight. He's a bigger dude now, and ran a 4.47 40. Did have the 42-inch vertical leap, so the lower body explosiveness is there. I'm just wondering, I'm almost expecting him to run sub 4.4 at his pro day. I think he might shed some weight. I think he wanted to be over 200 pounds, but this is a guy who can high point the football. And really what you're looking at is his suddenness. And so when you look at the 4.47, you're thinking he's probably quicker than he is fast. And really, sub 4.5, but this is a guy who's, also sub 6 feet. So that's another thing that you're really looking at there with Jalen Reagor is he a first rounder? You could make that argument that he is. A guy like Will Fuller ran sub 4.4 and got himself into the first round. Jalen Reagor, to me, still on the bubble. A guy who didn't really help himself, unfortunately, was Laviska Shenault. 6'1", 227, kind of wore the baggy shirt. Kind of wondered why. I mean, this is a guy, one of the bigger receivers, and ran a 4.58 40. Not really, not what I was expecting. We talk about some of the explosiveness, his ability to take the ball the distance, and we didn't really see that. And then he, come to find out, he also has an injury that requires surgery. He's going to be fine. He'll be ready to go by training camp. But there's just another example of Laviska Shenault, not being able to finish out everything. He can't finish out some of the games because of injuries. He tries to play through them, and I'll give him credit for that. But if you can't stay healthy, you can't stay out on the field, you can't help your football team. So that's the thing that I worry about Laviska Shenault. And he could fall out of round number 1 just because of the fact that, hey, this guy can't stay healthy. It's what happened. You look at Deebo Samuel, he ended up being a day 2 pick, and he's worked out very well for the 49ers. Laviska, I think because of that, he may fall. And that's something that I worry a little bit for him. I thought Michael Pittman had a decent day, 6'4", 223, 4'5", 240, despite being as big as he is, 36.5-inch vertical leap. Look, this is a guy who's physical at the point of attack, and a guy who can get vertical, get the late separation, really the nuances of the position, the nuances of the route running, his ability to get that arm out there, not push off, but basically get that arm extension and then be able to elevate, creating that late separation, elevate, jumping away from the corner, the way that he runs his routes, able to bend towards the sideline, really making sure that the quarterback, when they're throwing those balls to the outside, snapping off and bending those routes towards the sideline. I think Pittman Jr., another guy who I think absolutely should be a day 2 pick. James Prochet out of SMU didn't run the 40, 5'11", 200. Very confident in his hands, though. That's one of the things, natural pass catcher. And that's one of the things that I think you definitely see out of him. When you talk about a guy like KJ Hamler, for example, battled some drops at Penn State, 5'9", 178. And, I thought for him, he didn't look quite as comfortable catching the football as I was expecting him to be. T. Higgins, we're going to have to wait until his pro day there at Clemson to see what he can do. He's one of those guys as well. Where's he going to go? Is he going to be an end of the first round? I think that's kind of the consideration that you're talking about for him. Brandon Ayuk, 6', 205, had 33.5-inch arms. Really long arms for a guy at 6 feet. Ran a 4.5 40-inch vertical leap. I think he's going to be one of those guys who's going to be late day 1, probably an early day 2 pick. And then another guy, I don't know what they're feeding the guys in South Bend at the receiver position, but Chase Claypool really put on a show. 6'4", 238 pounds, ran a 4.4 240, 40.5-inch vertical leap. If you remember a season ago, Miles Boykin really turned heads running a sub 4.5 40, and that wound up getting him drafted on day 2. I think, any question about Chase Claypool playing tight end, I think he's really silenced that. That was one of the things I was expecting, to be perfectly honest, was him going to be playing tight end. And I think he separated himself from some of the bigger receivers, and I think he's one of those guys who, just like Miles Boykin shooting up draft boards, I think he's solidified himself there in the day 2's consideration as well. Dustin Duvernay, 5'10", 200, solidly built guy. Ran that 4.39 40. He's one of those interesting guys, 3rd, 4th round range potential. But the flip side, a guy like Quentin Cephas ran a 4.7 340, but he bench pressed 225 23 times, 38.5-inch vertical leap, very physical dude, 6'1", 202. This was a guy who every time you turned around, he was running a vertical route and getting by guys. Why? Because he was winning at the line of scrimmage. And he may not have that explosive speed getting off the ball, but all the physicality to his game reminds me a lot of Antoine Bolden. And if you remember Antoine Bolden, everybody was talking about him being a 1st-round pick. Then he runs a 4.7 140 at the combine. Now all of a sudden everyone's talking about him as a 3rd rounder. Wound up getting selected in the 2nd round, 54 overall. And the story, the rest is history, as they say. I look at Quintus Cephas. If we thought possibility of a 3rd round consideration, I think the 4.73 kind of scares teams. Even if he runs faster, they still have that 4.73 in the back of their mind, and really kind of a sloppy form at the 40 there at the combine. But for me, I'm looking at Cephas. He may fall to the 5th or 6th round. Just get him out on the football field and let him go. I think Quintez Cephas is going to be just fine. I think he'll end up making an NFL roster. He's one of those guys, surprising with the 40 time, but that's not going to be the end all be all for this kid. 59 catches, 901 yards, 15.3 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns. He's had to go through so much there in his career at Wisconsin, so I think, hopefully he'll have some redemption there at his pro day. But even if he gets drafted in the 5th or 6th round, Badger fans, I think you'll be okay with when he gets to the next level. Let's see, Chris Fink at 5'9", 186. They're at Notre Dame. You ran a 4.57 40, but had a 40-inch vertical leap. This is going to be a kid that you're talking about slot receivers. I think he has some potential. The 4.57. I think he's more of that shifty and quicker than fast. Antonio Gibson out of Memphis ran a 4.39 40. He's 6 foot 228, powerfully built. Looks more like a running back, and he's one of those guys. Where are you going to play him? Is he going to be a receiver? Is he going to be a running back? He's going to be kind of a do everything type of a guy, kind of in the mold of a Deebo Samuel. And he's one of those guys that you'll probably get at a discount. You'll probably get him in the 5th, 6th round. But he's definitely showcased some speed. Antonio Gandy Golden at 6'4", 223 out of Liberty, ran a 4.6 40, one of the stronger receivers, 22 bench press reps of the 225, 36-inch vertical leap as well. This is a guy who, look, the catch radius is insane. His ability to high point the football is absolutely there. Can be a red zone nightmare. He's one of those guys who I'd put in my top 10 at the receiver position. Yeah, the 4.6 40, is a bit of a concern. I think he's going to end up breaking 4.6, run probably in the mid 4.5s at his pro day. And, he's really a treat to watch. He's a big physical receiver. And I think a team probably in the 5th round, they're going to look at him and target him right in that area. But is he a guy who should be a 2nd or 3rd round pick? More than likely. So let's see who else, kind of stood out. KJ Osborne, I was expecting him to be in the 4.5 range. He actually broke that 4.48 40. This was someone who, I thought, looked average at times there at Miami, but some of that could potentially be because of the quarterback play. I think teams are really going to have to go back and study him. Go back and watch some of the Buffalo film and the chemistry that he had with Tyree Jackson. When Anthony Johnson went down to injury, KJ Osborne really had to step up. So I don't know how much we can really how much stock we can put into that Miami film for him. Malcolm Perry, surprised that he ran a 4.63 40. I was expecting it to at least be in the 4.5 range. I think he'll have his work cut out for him just a little bit. Joe Reed, here's another bigger receiver, 6 foot 224, ran a 4.47 40 with a 38-inch vertical leap, also bench press 225 21 times. Joe Reed's one of the better receivers that nobody, and I mean nobody, is really talking about. This was a guy who was quietly having a really solid year there for for UVA, catching passes from Bryce Perkins, but 77 catches, 679 yards, 7 touchdowns on the year, and a guy who also returned some kicks, had 5 kickoff returns for touchdown in his career. So the suddenness is absolutely there, and he's much like Gibson for Memphis, Antonio Gibson, and so I kind of compare the two of them. I think there's a fair comparison there. Quez Watkins out of Southern Miss, 6 foot 185. He's sending teams back to go watch the Southern Miss game film. Ran a 4.35 40. Really looked effortless with his ability to take off and run. Desmond Patton at 6'4", 225 there at Washington State, 4.48 40. A bigger receiver running that fast. That's turning some heads as well. I think that was kind of surprising to see. So that's something that he's going to send people back, watch some more of the Cougs game film. This is the guy who was catching passes from Gardner Minshew and Anthony Gordon. So it'll be interesting to see. Aaron Fuller out of Washington ran a 4.59 40. really proving that he's more of a quicker than fast receiver. But I think he's going to be, if he's getting drafted, it's going to be late day 3. Gabriel Davis, 6'2", 216. Courtney Davis, 6'1", 201. Both ran a 4.5, 440. Probably both going to be in that mid day 3 range. I really wish Gabriel Davis would have come back for one more year there at UCF, especially if Mackenzie Milton can somehow find a way to make it back on the field. He's just one of those guys who's going to get lost in the mix of all of these talented receivers. So that was really what I saw on day 1 of the draft. A lot of guys that stood out, some guys that still have some question marks, guys that are going to have to prove themselves out at their pro day. So then you transition to day number 2, and that's when you have your running backs and your offensive linemen. So the running back position, I'll tell you what, Jonathan Taylor, if you didn't have him at the top of your running back class, I think you have to now. Reason being is Jonathan Taylor, 5'10", 226, ran that 4.39 40. This is a track guy, running a 10-400 meters. So you knew he was going to run fast, ran sub 4.4, at 5'10" and 226 pounds. I mean, big dude. And, I thought that he looked really good laterally, the lateral cuts. You saw that on game film there for the Badgers, putting his foot in the ground, getting north and south, making guys miss in the open field with these quick lateral cuts. The biggest thing was he wasn't asked to be a receiver there at Wisconsin, and he showed off his ability to catch passes out of the backfield. And so I think with Jonathan Taylor, he's moving up draft boards big time. And, there's a good chance that he could end up being, I think the ceiling for him is going to be Miami, sitting there at number 18 overall. Is that where he's going to go? Probably not. He'll probably end up being the 26th overall pick if he's going to Miami. But even still, I think he solidified himself as the number 1 running back. Now, look, you still have the ball security issues, and I think he has to answer for that. 18 fumbles in his career, 15 of those were lost fumbles. And then, you also have the wear and tear on his legs. In 3 seasons, over 900 touches. That's going to be a concern for NFL teams. The only running back that was taken in round number 1 a season ago was Josh Jacobs. And, I think he had half those touches because he was sharing the backfield there in Alabama. So, DeAndre Swift didn't do anything wrong. I think, 5'8", 212, the junior out of Georgia, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, 4.48 40, 35.5-inch vertical leap. And, DeAndre Swift, he's a really good receiver. I think you see the suddenness coming out of the backfield as well. He didn't do anything to really dissuade anyone. I just think Jonathan Taylor's performance was really was staggering, and you're really scratching your head, just going, "Wow, what did I just see out of this guy?" Because all of the question marks that you had about Jonathan Taylor's game outside of the fumbles, he was able to answer, and so that's really, I think, was the highlight of the day for me. I thought, Cam Akers at 5'10", 217, running in the 4.47 40, 20 reps in the bench press, 35.5-inch vertical leap. He looks like an athlete there at the running back position. I think he can be a day 2 pick. J.K. Dobbins didn't really compete. Did bench press 225 23 times at 5'9", 209. He's got short arms. I thought it was really kind of interesting. He ran 29 and 3/4 inch arms. So the shorter end there of the arms, that could potentially be an issue coming out of the backfield. Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU, 5'7", 207, the bowling ball, ran a 4.6 40, but a 39.5-inch vertical leap. We knew this was someone who didn't have necessarily the speed to go the distance, but his shiftiness, his cutback ability, and then his ability to catch the football out of the backfield, really comfortable as a pass catcher. He's somebody who I think could have late day 2 consideration. Darrington Evans, I thought absolutely helped himself. I'm really happy for him out of Appalachian State. 5'11", 203, put up the 225 20 times. Kind of surprising there, but what was really surprising, the 4.4 140. That was second fastest among all of the running backs that were there and competing. And I thought that really helped him. I was talking about it in the last podcast that I did on the offense leading up to the combine. I wanted him to really stand out. back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, over 1,400 yards in 2019, 18 touchdowns, has 39 receptions in his career as well. Able to return some kicks, 3 kickoff returns for touchdown in his career. And so, definitely a tremendous athlete. And the question was whether or not he had the speed, the game breaking speed. And he absolutely was able to prove that there at the combine. Now, A.J. Dillon, everyone was saying, oh, he's going to break sub 4 or break 4.4. He's going to have to wait for his pro day to be able to do that. Ran a 4.53. But look, at 6 foot, 247, bench press, 223, 23 times. I think A.J. Dillon showed off the fact that he's a darn good athlete. I think he still has some issues as a pass catcher. Wasn't really asked to do that at BC. So that's still something that I think he's going to have to kind of show what he can do there. But definitely one of those bigger backs. If teams are looking for the next Derrick Henry, I think A.J. Dillon is one of those guys that people are going to be looking at and they're going to try to target. And probably going to be somewhere in day 3, probably a 4th rounder. I would venture to guess. But when you look at what Derrick Henry did, so 6 foot 247 was what A.J. Dillon measured in at. Same for Derrick Henry. Let's see, hand size. If you really care about the hand size, A.J. Dillon's hands about almost a full inch bigger at 9 5/8 inches. But the arm length. Really has him by over, Derrick Henry has him by over an inch. Ran a 4.54 versus the 4.53 for A.J. Dillon. Very comparable there. The vertical leap, A.J. Dillon 41 inches versus the 37 inches that Derrick Henry was able to do. So when you're talking about this and you're looking at the comparisons, 22 reps in the bench press for Henry, 23 for Dillon, very, very comparable in terms of the athleticism for these guys. And when you're talking about the production out on the field, A.J. Dillon burst onto the scene as a freshman. Everybody talking about this guy, over 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns, freshman All-American. As a sophomore, battled that high ankle sprain, still went over 1,100 yards. Got healthy in 2019, over 1,600 yards while sharing the backfield with David Bailey. Still have 14 touchdowns. I mentioned only 21 receptions in his career, but look, this is a guy who ran for over 4,300 yards and 38 touchdowns. Averaged 5.2 yards per carry. A.J. Dillon is one of those sneaky good running backs who probably going to end up being a 4th rounder. But when you look at his comparisons to Derrick Henry, if there's a team that is looking to get another Derrick Henry, especially if the Titans lose out on Derrick Henry and they're looking to try to replace him, watch them maybe take A.J. Dillon around higher than they normally would because he has shown the ability and shown some of the athleticism that I think teams weren't really expecting. Let's see. Zach Moss, the 4.65 40, a little bit of a concern. This was a guy, 5'9", 223, very physical between the tackles. I think, he's another guy who is better laterally than he is north and south. But at the same time, you want to get him north and south because he's going to run people over. He's just not going to run by you. Anthony McFarland, I think he needed to have a really fast time, 5'8", 208, ran a 4.44 40, only 29.5-inch vertical leap. So I was surprised with the lack of lower body explosiveness. But I think that speed, the straight line speed, is something for Anthony McFarland that, is going to make teams take notice. Let's see, Joshua Kelly, a guy, straight line, guy there for UCLA, one cut and go type of runner. He ran sub 4.5 with a 4.49 40. A couple of guys who really, looked pedestrian. Benny LeMay, there out of Charlotte. I was talking about him as maybe a Edwards-Helaire light. 5'8", 221, ran a 4.75 40. Yes, he put up the bench press, 24 reps in the bench press, only a 28.5-inch vertical leap. I think Benny LeMay is going to be hard pressed to get drafted. I think he's really going to have to work for things there. Tony Jones Jr. out of Notre Dame, man, 5'11", 220 pounds, ran a 4.68. Remember, I talked about A guy like Elijah Holyfield, needed to see some speed out of a bigger back, just didn't see it. Same goes for Tony Jones. Just put up 225 just 13 times. One of those bigger backs, expecting him to do a lot more there. The lower body explosiveness, just 32.5-inch vertical leap. I think he's going to struggle. He's going to have to really put on a show if he's going to want to get drafted. Jet Anderson, Darius Anderson there at TCU. I was expecting him to run a lot faster, especially with his route running ability. Ran a 4.61. I think he's more of the shiftiness and the lateral agility and lateral quickness. Salvan Ahmed, another guy, ran a 4.62 40. He was one of those guys I was talking about being a weapon, potentially putting in the slot or out on the outside and being one of those pass catchers. I thought Eno Benjamin, showed off some pretty good athleticism, natural pass catcher as well, 5'9", 207. I think he's one of those guys who's kind of solidified himself in the top 10 in terms of the running back class. Let's see if I've got anybody else who kind of stands out. Keyshawn Vaughn ran a 4.51, kind of expecting him to be a little bit quicker than that. He's one of those guys who, shows some pretty good athleticism and speed. Jermichael Hasty, a lot of people were talking about him possibly running a sub 4.5. He ran a 4.55 40. So the running back position, I think Jonathan Taylor really, emerged as the number one prospect. And I think that was really the narrative there for the running back position. Transitioning to the offensive line, and look, if there was anybody that had a day, Tristan Wirfs may have had the best combine performance for an offensive lineman ever. 6'5", 320 pounds, the Iowa junior ran a 4.85 40, and then set records with his 36.5-inch vertical leap and 121-inch broad jump, which I think equates to 10 foot 1 inch. Those were records for an offensive lineman at the combine. And 36.5-inch vertical leap, only 16 of the 46 receivers at the combine jumped higher than Tristan Wirfs. So when you're talking about Tristan Wirfs, any question about him as a top 10 pick just went out the window. I'll tell you that. So, when you think of a guy like Brandon Scherf, that came out of Iowa, he was the number 5 overall pick in the 2015 draft. Brandon Scherf, dominant, at times there at Iowa. I think Tristan Wirfs, you didn't see, quite the domination despite the physical skills. But when you look at things, in the comparison between these two guys, from an athleticism standpoint, Tristan Wirfs, really set the bar. He even bench pressed 225 24 times versus 23 for Sheriff. And people are talking about, well, should Tristan Wirfs, does he have enough athleticism to even play tackle? Should he kick inside to guard? He played left tackle in a pinch when Alaric Jackson went down to injury, moved back over and was a right tackle. I think he'll be a right tackle in the league. I think he's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 tackles taken. I think you've got Jedrick Wills, and Wirfs battling it out more than likely for the Giants. And then whoever doesn't get drafted, the Cardinals are sitting right there. DJ Humphries, had his first season where he played all 16 games. So you're looking at Arizona. That could be a landing spot for Tristan Wirfs. But just a tremendous combine performance. Looking at some of these offensive linemen, I think a guy who really struggled, if you're going to take the opposite, angle to this, I think when you look at a guy like Trey Adams out of Washington, 6'8", 318, really battled injuries. And this is a guy who I think from a technical standpoint, as an athlete, as an offensive tackle, this is someone who he battled those injuries, but a guy who can still get the job done. But when you run a 5.6 40, that's really going to have teams kind of back off a little bit. I think that's what happened with Orlando Brown. Teams, he still got drafted in the second round, but I thought, Trey Adams, he needed to have a much better performance at the combine. 24.5-inch vertical leap as well. So some of that explosiveness wasn't really there. He really looked flat-footed a lot of times in his game film in 2019. Needed to have a really good combine performance and just didn't happen. Ezra Cleveland out of Boise State. I thought he really helped himself. 6'6", 311, 4'9", 340, bench press 225, 30 times, which, it's interesting. You got that upper body strength. and he's a guy who's really more of a finesse player. You didn't see it really any of the upper body strength translate to any power, and really a lot of the power what you're talking about is going to be in the lower half. That butt, the hamstrings, the quads, and you didn't see that in his game. He didn't generate a whole lot of movement. It was mostly the finesse, and he's very much an easy mover. You saw that in the drills, but man, you want to see more out on the game film. So he's somebody who I think definitely helped himself at the combine, showing off his athleticism. But you wonder, is he going to be a Colton Miller who's going to be a workout warrior in the weight room, or is he going to be more like a Jake Fisher who really never panned out? That's really the big question mark that you're going to have with Ezra Cleveland. So going down my list, taking a look at some of the guys, I think Lloyd Cushenberry is still going to end up being the number one center. 34 and an eighth inch arms at 6'3", 312, ran a 5.27 40, but you're not going to be asking your center to run 40-yard dashes, and not in this century. Let's see. We continue scrolling through some of these tackles, and Austin Jackson out of USC ran a 5.07 40, 27 reps in the bench press, has over 34-inch arms. He was someone who I think, solidifying himself in that third tier of offensive linemen. I think you've got some of the elite tackles, and then that second tier, your probably Mekhi Becton, possibly a Josh Jones, right there, and then right after that is going to be your Austin Jackson, 6'5", 322 from SC, really a good athlete, put on some good game film. He did get beat by AJ Epinesa, but there's a lot of good game film there in the Holiday Bowl for him as well. Josh Jones, 6'5", 319. He looked really light on his feet. I was expecting him to test a lot better than he did. Ran a 5.27 40, just a 28.5-inch vertical leap. You compare that to a guy like Matt Pert, out of Connecticut, more rawness to his game, but 6'7", 318. I watched that Connecticut game against Houston. I thought he actually looked more dominant of the two, and he has 36 and 5/8 inch arms. I mean, just staggering length, 5.06 40, 26 reps in the bench press, 30-inch vertical leap. He outperformed Josh Jones. So, a team who might want to be a little bit more patient because there is some rawness to his game. You could probably wait a round or so and be able to pick up Matt Pert, and you've got yourself a pretty darn good athlete and a guy who, he gets so low. I think that, that flexibility to him, you're really going to see that, if you pop on any of that game film, he gets that butt down and gets really low, and you want to see that, a guy who's not going to lose leverage. And one guy who was really interesting was Danny Pinter out of Ball State, 6'4", 306, ran a 4.9 140. I think he's going to be someone, people are talking about him possibly, transitioning to guard. I think he'll probably end up being a center and probably be a pretty darn good center when it's all said and done. Andrew Thomas is our fourth tackle in the group. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about him as one of the elite tackles. 6'5", 315, another guy with over 36-inch arms, ran a 5.22 40, and checked all the boxes, but it was one of those things to where I think there were a few offensive linemen in this class who, from an athleticism standpoint, just stood out a little bit more. Mekhi Becton, he's a guy who's going to stand out anywhere in a crowd. 6'7", 364, 7-foot wingspan, and he runs a 5.1 40. I mean, just staggering, from an athleticism standpoint. Had to cut it short due to an injury, but definitely someone who absolutely stood out. Matt Hennessy from Temple, the center, ran a 5.18 40, showed off some pretty good footwork. This is a guy who, from a pass protection standpoint, one of the better centers that you're going to find. I think he's a guy who's going to battle to be the number 2 center taken in this draft class. He's going to battle a guy by the name of Cesar Ruiz, who ran a 5.08 40, 28 reps in the bench press, 33-inch vertical leap at 6'3", 307. Yeah, I think Cesar Ruiz is going to be your number 2 center. Matt Hennessy, I think, is going to be one of those guys that's going to be right on his heels. Let's see. Jedrick Wills. Gosh, we haven't talked about Jedrick Wills. Got excited with some of the other guys that are out there, but that was the thing. Jedrick Wills is a guy who comes to play, plays with some a nastiness to him, that nasty disposition, really a mean streak, 6'4", 312, a guy who has really good lateral agility, kind of, some basketball player type lateral quickness. For a guy his size, ran a 5.05 540, 34 and a half inch vertical leap, not quite on par with Tristan Wirfs with some of his athleticism, but the reason why I think Jedrick Wills is my number one tackle is the consistency. This was a guy with his pass sets. If he did get beat, it was because he was overextending. And that's really what you saw more than anything else. He would just he'd reach out, and when you're lunging, when you're reaching, when you're overextending or you're oversetting, you're going to get beat. When you're overextending, you're going to be off balance, and guys can slip your block. But he was most of the time in his pass sets, they were about as pretty, for these offensive linemen in this year's class, because he'd fire out of his stance quickly, very flexible, played with excellent leverage, took really good angles with his kick slides. That's one of the things that Trey Adams, a lot of his kick slides were horizontal, and a guy that's going to be coming off the edge, he's going to beat you to the edge every time. Not with Jedrick Wills, a guy who just took tremendous angles, and a guy who was just going to beat you up. And if you're going to get by him, he's going to make you earn it. One guy who didn't really get to run at the combine, but put up 44 reps in the bench press, Netane Muti out of Fresno State, 6'3", 315. The biggest thing for him is going to be the health concerns. When he's actually healthy, the dude is going to beat you up. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who's going to maul you. That's going to be a guy in the middle. He'll be a second round pick if the medicals all check out. I think if you're looking for a developmental guy, how about Hakeem Adeniji out of Kansas, 6'4", 302, ran a 5'17", 40, showed off really good athleticism, 34-inch vertical leap, much better mover than I thought. Charlie Heck out of North Carolina, 5'16", 40 at 6'8", 311. I thought he looked decent in terms of his athleticism as well. I think he's going to be somebody who's going to be a day 3 guy, probably a 5th or 6th round pick, but I think he's going to stick with an NFL roster. I remember Justin School filling in there for the 49ers. I'm looking at Charlie Heck as possibly being a guy that could fill in just like him in his rookie season even. Shane Lemieux showed off some decent athleticism, 5'1", 140. Damian Lewis, my big mauler there at the guard position, 6'2", 327, 5'2", 440. 27 reps in the bench press, a 30-inch vertical leap. I thought he definitely, solidified himself as one of the top 3 guards in this draft. Didn't really do anything to dissuade that. John Runyon, look, he's 6'4", 306, on the shorter side in terms of the arms. I want to see him kick inside. I think that's really where he showcased and looked good at the Senior Bowl. Ran a 5.08 40, looked above average with his athleticism. He's going to be someone to keep an eye out for. Going to be probably a day 3 guy, but a guy who I think can definitely lock on an offense. So those are the offensive linemen that really stood out for me when I look at the draft class and kind of scroll through things. Jack Driscoll ran a 5.02 40 there at Auburn. Everyone talks about Prince Tega Winogo. He didn't compete there, but Jack Driscoll did, and I thought that he was more of an average athlete, but every time you watched him, he was one of those guys who seemed to be in position. The 5.02 40 shows you, he's a little bit more athletic than I think people were giving him credit for. So we got through the first 2 days. We're going to go ahead and transition immediately over to the defense. And so on day 3, you had the defensive linemen and the linebackers, and they divided up the defensive tackles and the defensive ends. And I'm really glad that they did, so that you can kind of get the comparison between the two groups. And if you're talking about the defensive tackle position, obviously Derek Brown was the guy that was going to stand out. He's 6'3", 326, ran a 5.16 40, 28 reps in the bench press. This is a guy who is going to beat you off the ball with first step quickness, has power in his hands, drives guys back into the backfield, splits double teams, has the power to really just force his way into the backfield. Very disruptive. Top 10 pick. If Carolina doesn't take him at 7, He's coming off the board to the Jaguars at number 9, which is where I have him going. I thought he convinces me that that's where he's going to be is that he's going to be the number one guy. You didn't get Javon Kinlaw, the number 2 tackle, 6'5", 324. Didn't get to see him there at the combine workout. But one guy that you did was Neville Gallimore there out of Oklahoma, 6'2", 304. Solidified himself as a top 5 tackle in this draft, 4'7", 940. I thought that was one of the things that was really impressive. This is a guy who has that quick get off coming off the line, and that was really on display here at the combine. The fact that he ran that 4'7", 940, that's third fastest at the defensive tackle position, really turned some heads and solidified himself as an early day 2 guy, going to be someone that's going to come off the board early in that second round range. I thought Ross Blacklock also showed off some of his twitchiness in the drills and ran a 4.940 at 6'3", 290 pounds. And so I think he's another guy who can potentially be that third offensive tackle, as is, another guy who showed off some pretty good athleticism with Justin Madubuike. Ran a 4.83 40. We knew that he had the power in his hands and the ability to bench press offensive lineman, 31 reps in the bench press, 6'3", 293. I think he solidified himself as well. I saw some people talking about him possibly being very late pick there in the first round. I think he'll probably be a day 2 guy, but definitely showed off some tremendous athleticism at the defensive tackle position. Jason Strobridge measured in at 6'4", 275, ran a 4'8", 940. So for the defensive tackle position, that's pretty impressive. But when you're talking about Strobridge, you compare him with a guy like James Smith Williams running with the defensive ends at 6'4", 265, ran a 4'6", 40. So that's kind of where Jason Strobridge is going to be. He's one of those tweeners. Is he going to be a defensive end? Is he going to be a defensive tackle? Where does he really fit? So that was somewhat of a concern for me. Watching Raekwon Williams run, he ran a 5'04", 40. But when you watch him in some of the drills, really struggled. He's 6'4", 308, but he struggled with being able to bend and the flexibility. I love the fact that they did the hoop drill. Guys, it really exposed, guys that are able to, that have the stiffness and can't really drop. Really a high cut guy, couldn't really get down, and that's really going to hurt him when you're talking about transitioning to the next level. I thought Rob Windsor at 6'4", 290 showed off some good athleticism, 4'9", 40 there. I thought his athleticism there was really on par. Let's see, Jordan Elliott there from Mizzou, 6'4", 302, ran a 5'02", 40. He's that third guy that's kind of in that, or I'm sorry, fourth guy that's in that consideration when you're talking about, Ross Blacklock, and you're talking about Neville Gallimore and Justin Madubuike. I keep calling him Madubuike. But Jordan Elliott is another guy that you have to fit into that conversation. He's in that next tier, and the 5'02", 40 at 6'4", 302 definitely solidifies himself there. Carlos Davis, Khalil Davis, the twins there at Nebraska. Khalil Davis gets the nod, running the 4.75 40, which I believe is the fastest for a defensive tackle at the combine. 6'1", 308. I think he's still going to be somebody, because of that 40 time, he may end up getting drafted. His brother, Carlos Davis, ran a 4.8, 240. Thing was Nebraska couldn't really stop anyone on the run. So you're going to have to go back to the game film and say, are there some draftable qualities with these guys? And that's really what teams are going to have to ask themselves. I think it might be questionable there. So that's something where teams, I think, are really going to have to end up doing their homework. McTelvin Agim out of Arkansas, a guy who can be disruptive on the inside. He ran a sub 540, measured in at 6'3", 309. Leki Fotu, the big dude out of Utah, 6'5", 330 pounds, ran a 5'1", 540. I mean, are you kidding me? A guy that big moving that fast. That's something that you don't see every day. I think Leki Fotu is somebody who wants to prove that he does deserve to be in that second day consideration. And I'm trying to pull up, let's see, Starlo Tulele, just to give you an idea, 6 foot 311, ran a 5'3", 140. So just in terms of the measurables, Lecky Fotu, a bigger guy than Star Lotulelei, and also ended up running a faster 40 time. A guy who has some of that speed to power as a big dude. He's somebody to keep an eye out for, as is Devon Hamilton. I told you in my last podcast, I wanted to see what he could do. Really didn't get to showcase everything that he could do there at Ohio State because he had all of these other guys on the defensive side of the football. But Devon Hamilton was a solid player there at Ohio State. 6'4", 320 pounds, ran a 5'1", 440, 33 reps in the bench press. He really showed that he's a tremendous athlete and a guy who I think is stout at the point of attack, can get into the backfield, make some plays, and can rush the quarterback a little bit as well. I like Devon Hamilton as a top 10 defensive tackle at this point. And, I thought he stood out in the drills, someone who really caught everyone's eye. He's going to be somebody who I think people are going to be talking about. One last guy that ran in those drills as well that I'm going to talk about at the defensive tackle position was Malcolm Roach, 6'2", 297, a guy who played end, also played tackle for the Texas Longhorns. Depended if you were 3-man, 4-man front, where he was lining up. And he's not the tallest guy, but he still ran a 4.8, 440. So I think that athleticism is something that teams are going to be looking at. Only 31 and just under 32 inches with his arms, 31 and 7/8 inches to be exact. And then 6'2", 297. It's going to be can he the athleticism really translate with his lack of length. When we transition to the defensive ends, I'll tell you what, there are some slower times here at the defensive end position. And you start worrying about some of the athleticism, some of these guys who are going to be some of the, who are going to be our top pass rushers in this draft class. Chase Young didn't compete, did measure in at 6'5", 264. We'll see him hopefully at Ohio State's pro day. But man, you just go through the list. I thought Alton Robinson did run pretty well. 6'3", 264, ran a 4.69 40, 35 reps in the bench press, 35.5-inch vertical leap. Alton Robinson, I thought his play, coming into 2019, he was going to be one of the top 6 or 7 defensive ends, and really struggled in 2019 with some of his production. I think he's starting to redeem himself, and maybe he'll start moving up some draft boards. Jabari Zuniga out of Florida, 6'3", 264, 4.6, 440, shows off some pretty good athleticism. This is a guy who's going to come off the edge. He ran much faster than Jonathan Greenard, who ran a 4.8, 740, who measured in at 6'3", 263. I think Zuniga, from as long as he can stay healthy and keep himself out on the field. He's someone who has the ability to kick inside and rush the passer as an interior pass rusher as well. Did that quite a bit at Florida, kicking in as a 3 technique. He could potentially garner some day 2 consideration. But a guy who, AJ Epinesa, 6'5", 275 out of Iowa, have him penciled in as my number 2 defensive end. But man, he ran a 5.04 40 and looked pretty stiff in the drills. We knew that was going to happen. We knew that this was a guy who didn't have some of the quickness and the first step quickness and the speed, but he was going to showcase some of his power and the technique. And you saw that, he really was able to set up that soft edge coming off and able to set the line of scrimmage and, set the edge against the run. But man, the 5.04 40, and just 17 reps in the bench press, expecting him to be much more powerful than he showed there at the combine. He's one of those guys to where I think his draft stock's going to fall. He's really going to have to show out pretty well there at Iowa, because the game film, that was the biggest question. Yes, he had double-digit sacks, and a lot of it was based on his technique and his power. But he's not going to be able to overpower guys at the next level. Does he have some of that athleticism? And that's where I'm not really sure that it's going to translate that like everybody's hoping. I think one guy who definitely helped himself was Alex Highsmith out of Charlotte at 6'3", 248, ran a 4.7 40. You're probably talking about the 4th round range for him, but a guy, look, last season, 15 sacks, over 40 tackles for loss in his career, a guy who knows how to get home and showed off, pretty good athleticism overall. James Lynch, 6'4", 289, ran a 501.40. This guy's going to be a 5 technique. I still compare him a little bit, his game to J.J. Watt. He's not as athletic as J.J., but there are some similarities to his game. The combine just proved he's not a tremendous athlete compared to J.J. Watt, but how many guys are? I think he's going to be a guy who's going to be a very good pro. Probably going to end up being a 4th rounder, but a guy who I think is going to be in the league a long time. Laurel Murchison, a guy who nobody's really talking about, 6'2", 297, really the same measurables as Malcolm Roach. Ran a 505.40, not overly spectacular in comparison to Roach, but what you really saw with him was the bend. I thought in the hoop drill he looked very natural, natural bender. A guy who there for the Wolfpack, showed off the ability to get after the passer. Thought he was going to end up being kind of a 5 technique, but the lack of height and the length is something that really is going to leave you scratching your head. But 12 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, competing in the ACC. He's someone who I think could end up garnering some late day 3 consideration and could end up making a team. Let's see. Trevin Hill out of Miami, ran a 4.8940 at 6'3", 248. That's just not going to get it done with his speed and athleticism. And I mentioned AJ Epinesa. I think one guy who I think from an athleticism standpoint could end up being the number 2 defensive end taken after Chase Young, and that's Marlon Davidson out of Auburn. 6'3", 303, ran a 504.40, 33-inch arms, bench press 225, 21 times. Marlon Davidson, for me, there were times where he looked unblockable coming off the edge, able to bend, but you didn't see consistency from him. And that's really the biggest question mark that I have with Marlon Davidson is this is going to be a guy, his motor ran hot and cold, but when it ran hot, he really could make some plays. He's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. He'll probably end up being maybe a late 1st rounder, probably an early day 2 pick, but a guy who's going to, you put him out there on an NFL field, and I think he's going to flourish, and he's going to stick with the team for a long time. Bradley Anai, not a guy that you're going to expect to be a tremendous athlete. 6'3", 257, ran a 4.9340. So the athleticism is a little bit of a concern, but a guy who just gets the job done, gets home coming off the edge, a guy who's going to win with his hands more often than not. Doesn't have tremendous length, but look, he knows how to get after the quarterback. 29.5 sacks in his career, including 13 this past season. He'll probably end up being a day 3 guy, but look, he can get home, get to the quarterback. If you can do that, then that's something that teams are going to really start taking notice of. Let's see. Do I have anybody else in terms of the defensive ends? It looks like that's pretty much it in terms of the guys that stood out for me one way or another. Kenny Willekes, I talked about him at Michigan State, 6'3", 264, ran a 4.8740. I think he's going to struggle to get drafted. It's one of those things that'll probably end up being a late pick when it's all said and done. DJ Wonnum out of South Carolina, 6'5", 258, ran a 4.7340. I think he's solidifying himself as probably a midday 3 guy when it's all said and done as well. So the linebackers also took the field, and we saw some pretty darn good athleticism out of some of these these linebackers. 2 of the top inside backers ended up actually pulling up with hamstring injuries. Kenneth Murray out of OU, 6'2", 241, absolutely looks the part. 38-inch vertical leap, 4.5240, very explosive. And then Patrick Queen, 6 foot 229, ran a 4.540. So both of these guys, are in that 1st round consideration. Kenneth Murray flies all around the field for OU when he's allowed to just pin his ears back and go. He can make plays all over the field. He's a guy that against LSU, before he kind of tweaked his hamstring, was chasing down Joe Burrow, and was really close to getting to him. And really he was chasing Joe Burrow outside the pocket when he did tweak his hamstring. Tweaks it again at the combine. That's a lingering injury that hopefully he'll be able to get wrapped up. And then for Patrick Queen, when you put on the game film, any game film for LSU, and you're trying to watch somebody else, like I wanted to watch Jacob Phillips, but Patrick Queen just kept flashing. You kept seeing him making plays all over the field. I think the instincts are absolutely there, sideline to sideline ability. He's going to be a guy who I think, he's forcing himself into that first round discussion. K'Lavon Chaisson did not run the 40, didn't really compete in the drills. 6'3", 254. I think for me, I look at him, and I think he can end up being Tampa Bay's pick there at number 14 overall, especially with the way that the edge rushers, that you didn't see a lot of the explosiveness there. I think K'Lavon Chaisson, his draft stock's going to continue to rise because his speed coming off the edge, there aren't a lot of guys that are able to do that in this year's draft. One guy who I think definitely helped himself and could potentially be a first rounder is Zach Bond, 6'2", 238, ran a 4.65 40, put up 24 reps in the bench press as well. 32.5-inch vertical leap, wasn't spectacular, but definitely a tremendous athlete. As an edge rusher, let's see who else. The two Alabama guys, Anthony Jennings, Terrell Lewis, didn't work out. At least in terms of the 40, Terrell Lewis did show off a 37-inch vertical leap at 6'5", 262 pounds, so that's pretty impressive. But look, I've been kind of burying the lead a little bit on you. Isaiah Simmons there for Clemson, 6'4", 238. I knew if I started talking about him, I wouldn't stop. 4.39 40, 39-inch vertical leap. Tremendous athlete, guy who, just looks so fluid in the drills, and, a guy who, he looks like a safety in a linebacker's body. I mean, he was a converted safety as it was, but, just a guy who ends up making plays all over the field. Didn't see Darrell Taylor, Josh Uche, or Curtis Weaver run 40 times. So those are going to be guys that we're going to have to wait for their pro day to really see where they're at and how they kind of stack up with some of the guys that are around him. Let's see, Jordan Brooks out of Texas Tech, inside backer, 6', 240, ran a 4.5 440. Sean Bradley of Temple, another inside backer, 6'1", 235, 4.5 140. Two guys who can definitely cover a lot of ground. I knew Sean Bradley was going to show off the athleticism. I think Jordan Brooks solidifies himself as a day 2 guy. Sean Bradley probably going to get drafted higher than people are expecting there in day 3. I wanted to see Akeem Davis-Gaither run 6'1", 224. I'm moving him into my top 5 at the outside linebacker position because he fits today's NFL. I just want to see just how fast. I'm curious to see how fast he is. Troy Dye out of Oregon, 6'3", 231. Another guy who didn't run the 40. Really wanted to kind of see how he stacks up. Freaking Willie Gay out of Mississippi State. Know that he has the off-field issues. He's going to have to answer to that. That's probably going to move his stock down somewhere into the day 3 range. But look, 6'1", 243 pounds, ran a 4.46 40, 39.5-inch vertical leap, showed off really good athleticism in the drills. He's somebody for me that, if he can, really answer a lot of those questions, he could potentially end up being that conversation as a potential day 2 pick. But I think he'll fall to day 3. And if he does that, he could potentially be a steal. Let's see. Logan Wilson, this is a guy I think, very natural dropping into coverage. 6'2", 241, ran a 4.63 40 as well. A guy who just makes plays all over the field, over 400 tackles in his career. And I mean, if I read off his stat line, really he's an athlete. He's a guy who's going to make plays. Just because he played his football at Wyoming doesn't mean he's not a day 2 guy. 409 tackles, 34 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks, 10 interceptions, including 4 this past season, 14 pass breakups, 5 forced fumbles. Guy makes plays all over the field. The athleticism is absolutely there. I think Logan Wilson is going to be one of those guys that is going to be taken on day 2. Let's see. Davion Taylor out of Colorado ran that 4.49 40 time. Really is kind of a glorified, safety. But the speed, he's going to find a home there at the next level. Justin Sternad, I was glad to see him running a 40 time there for Wake Forest after sitting out, some time. 4.74 40, but I like the instincts there. Dante Olson out of Montana. I was mentioning that I really wanted to see what he could run. If he was showed off some athleticism, then people could be talking about him as a day 3 guy. But man, 6'2", 237, ran a 4.88 40. I don't know if there's going to be any coming back from that. He's really going to have to show out well in his pro day, and I just don't know if he's going to have enough there. Let's see. Carter Coughlin out of Minnesota, 6'3", 236, ran a 4.57 40, but I think there's some stiffness in his hips. I think he's more of a straight line guy. Malik Harrison definitely showed off his ability dropping into coverage, 6'3", 234, ran a 4.66 40. I look at Malik Harrison and I see a day 2 pick, probably a 3rd rounder. At inside linebacker for Ohio State, and a guy who I think could end up being a starter early on. So if we move on to the final day of the combine, and we're talking about the corners, Jeff Okudah obviously is the number 1 cornerback, ran a 4.48 40, 41-inch vertical leap, 32 and 5/8 inch arms, so some really long arms as well at the cornerback position. He showcased, and showed out and showed why he's the number 1 corner. But C.J. Henderson solidified himself as the number 2 corner, in my opinion. 6'1", 204, 4.39 40, 37.5-inch vertical leap, bench press 225 20 times, which is among the top in the draft class for the corners. So that really, makes you take notice. And he looks so fluid in the drills and the hips, very fluid, turning and running. I think there's no question that C.J. Henderson's going to be the number 2 corner coming off the board. Trevin Diggs measured in a 6'1", 205, but he didn't work out, in terms of any of the measurables. So we're going to have to wait to see some of those things at his pro day. Let's see, Jeff Gladney and Christian Fulton, 2 guys are going to be competing to be in that next wave of corners. Christian Fulton, 6', 197, Gladney, 5'10", 191. Both showed off some pretty good speed. Fulton just edging him out, 4.46 to 4.48. But Gladney with the 37.5-inch vertical leap had 2 inches there on Fulton, who had a 35.5-inch vertical leap. I think those guys are really settling in that next wave of corners. You look at a guy like A.J. Green out of Oklahoma State, 6'1", 202, looked pretty good in the Senior Bowl, then runs a 4.62 40. So that's concerning to say the least. And then a guy like A.J. Terrell at 6'1", 195 pounds. You look at him and similar measurables to A.J. Green, though has a little bit longer arms, ran a 4.42 40, 34.5-inch vertical leap. A.J. Terrell got beat up a little bit in the national title game, going up against Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. But a guy who I think, using some of his length and that speed, the speed for a guy 6'1", that means that he's going to be a day 2 pick. I think you can write that down. Troy Pride ran a 4.4 40. We knew that he was going to be fast. I honestly expected him to break 4.4. So we'll see what he does there at Notre Dame's pro day. The fastest guy was Javelin Guidry, ran a 4.29 40. The track guy, 5'9", 191. But he's somebody who I think if he's going to get drafted, it's going to be late. Isang Bassi looked much more fluid than I think people were expecting him to be. 5'9", 191, 4.46 40, 39.5-inch vertical leap. This is a guy who has tremendous ball skills. He's not afraid to get physical, really a good tackler on the outside. I worry a little bit about some of the stiffness in his hips. but I think he is more fluid than people are giving him credit for at the same time. So he's someone to keep an eye out for. Darnay Holmes out of UCLA, another guy who can compete to potentially be a day 2 pick. Ran a 4.48 at 5'10", 195, potentially a nickel back there. Cameron Dantzler, 6'2", just a buck 87. Ran a 4.64 40. His arms actually only measured in at 30 and 5/8 inches. So the measurables concerning. You expect him to run a little bit faster. At 6'2", you're going to worry about some of that long speed dealing with some of the bigger receivers. That could potentially impact some of his draft stock. Noah Igbenogany out of Auburn, 5'10", 198, ran a 4.48 40, 37-inch vertical leap. A guy who, look, you know him for his explosiveness in the return game, but that also can translate to the cornerback position as well, especially with him driving on the football and making some plays. The recovery speed as well. I think Igbenogany is going to be in that day 2 consideration when it's all said and done. And then, Kendall Vildor, I'll give you a small school guy out of Georgia Southern, 5'10", 191, group of 5 guy there in the Sun Belt, ran a 4.44 40, 35.5-inch vertical leap. The explosiveness absolutely there. Also bench press 225, 22 times. Really a tremendous athlete, but has really good ball skills as well. And I think he's going to be a day 3 guy who's going to end up being a pretty solid nickel at the next level. So finally we get to our safeties. When it's all said and done, the safeties take over the field at the very end. And I think the guy that, really everybody drew their eyes to, because Grant Delpit, wasn't working out. Ashton Davis out of Cal, battling some injuries, 6'1", 202 out of Cal. He wasn't getting to compete. So really the eyes went to Kyle Duggar out of Lenoir-Rhyne. Everyone wanted to see what type of athlete he was. 6'1", 217, did not disappoint. 4.49 40, 42-inch vertical leap. This is a guy who made plays all over the field, and he really looked like a man among boys. You wanted to see, though, how he was going to translate compared to some of these other guys. 237 tackles in his career, 10 interceptions, 36 pass breakups. He definitely showed that he's one of the better athletes in this draft class. Xavier McKinney out of Alabama ran a 4.63 40 at 6'201. You worry a little bit about some of his athleticism. Is there some stiffness to him? On the flip side, you have L'Jarius Sneed out of Louisiana Tech, 192, ran a 4.37 40, 41-inch vertical leap, has experience at both corner and safety. He's someone who's going to be interesting. Antonio Winfield absolutely helped himself. 5'9", 203. People talked about his long speed. Ran a 4.45 40. Takes tremendous angles to the football. A guy who has tremendous ball skills. Makes a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. Antoine Winfield, day 2 corner or safety. I have him as my number 3 safety behind McKinney and Delpit right now. Tanner Muse. Ran a 4.41 40 at 6'2", 227, but he's one of those guys, looks more like a linebacker than a safety, very stiff in the hips. I thought Jeremy Chin absolutely helped himself out of Southern Illinois. 6'3", 221, ran a 4.45 40, 20 reps at 225 in the bench press, 41-inch vertical leap, another tremendous athlete there. So those were the guys that really stood out when you're looking at this draft class. I thought Terrell Burgess ran a 4.46 40 at 5'11", 202. He's somebody who I think is going to garner some of that consideration in that round 4, round 5 range. But there weren't a ton of tremendous athletes. I thought J.R. Reed 4.54. Jordan Fuller ran a 4.67. That's going to be concerning, especially for guys 6'2", 203 trying to separate himself. But I definitely think Antoine Winfield and Kyle Duggar, if you're talking about who really helped themselves, those were 2 guys that absolutely did that. So that's my review of the combine and really where how guys how things would shake out there. So we're going to kind of power through the first half of my first round in the mock draft. Obviously you look at number 1 overall. Joe Burrow's going to Cincinnati. Zach Taylor gets his guy. He swept all the awards in the postseason, Heisman Trophy winner, college football playoff champions as well. Ends up number one overall pick. I expect him to be the first guy to take the stage there in the Bellagio Fountains on draft day. The Washington Redskins, look, I think Ron Rivera, you have to do your due diligence. Dwayne Haskins, who is he? Talk to Joe Burrow, talk to Tua, but adding Chase Young to the defensive line that has Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat, Matt Ioannidis actually was the team's leading sack artist with 8.5. Ryan Kerrigan starting to get up there a little bit. Had started 120 games in a row before concussion kept him out of the lineup. Ultimately, calf injury sent him on to the IR in January. This is a guy that look, he's 31 years old. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent. I think he returns in 2020 and Sweat building upon what he did. But Chase Young is one of those guys who can be a game wrecker. I think he'll be number 2. You look at the Lions at number 3. I think Jeffrey Okudah makes a ton of sense. Absolutely. They had just 7 interceptions, which is definitely concerning. And I think, when you look at a guy like Darius Slay, they're talking about potentially trading him. That's obviously going to be a concern. I think Amani Oruwariye is not ready to be a starter. Justin Coleman is in the slot. You add Jeffrey Okudah to the mix there on the outside. That's going to allow them to focus on some other positions later on in the draft. Mentioned the Giants, Dave Gettleman. Where are they going to go there with that pick? I've got Jedrick Wills out of Alabama going there. You selected Saquon Barkley, then you selected Daniel Jones. You got to be able to protect your investments. Mike Remmers didn't pan out at the right tackle position. He's gone. As long as they're not going with an offensive tackle, I think this is where Jedrick Wills is going to go. Here's the name to really think about, though. Isaiah Simmons. And I'll tell you why. Alec Ogletree, David Mayo, all the linebackers there on the inside, they're all free agents. They're going to need somebody who's going to be able to cover tight ends. You've got Zach Ertz. You're going to have, Mark Andrews. You're going to have to face George Kittle, Travis Kelce, I believe. So many tight ends. Who's going to cover them? Is Alec Ogletree going to cover them? No way. Isaiah Simmons would be a perfect fit there for the Giants. So I think if they don't address the offensive tackle with number 4, in free agency, they have to go tackle. But if they do get the right tackle, this pick's going to end up being Isaiah Simmons. Miami, the Dolphins, the tank for Tua, they ultimately get their guy, a guy who threw a touchdown pass every 7.86 pass attempts, over 20 touchdown passes in each of the last 2 seasons before throwing his first interception. A guy who is known for his ball placement, known for throwing his receivers open. Tua, that hip is checking out and ready to make a full recovery. Miami, you may need to trade up with Detroit to make sure that you get your guy. But Tua, in my opinion, should be going to Miami. I talked about the possibility for the Chargers to take Jordan Love, saying that this could be Daniel Jones 2.0, and having Daniel Jones taken ahead of Dwayne Haskins this year, having Jordan Love taken ahead of Justin Herbert. Not ready to jump on that bandwagon yet, but ultimately when you had Phillip Rivers leave, that really shook things up. You have Tyrod Taylor, and he's not going to be the answer long term. Unless they get a free agent quarterback, this has to be Herbert. But with Russell Okung getting traded for Trey Turner, that also opens up the door for a potential offensive tackle. So you're looking there. That could be Tristan Wirfs. That could be Mekhi Becton. Even Jedrick Wills, depending on what happens at number 4. Free agency is really going to dictate what this pick is going to ultimately look like. At number 7, I've got Isaiah Simmons penciled in here right now. 6'4", 238 linebacker out of Clemson. I think we have one of 3 picks really with this. And kind of the way that I look at it, Cam Newton's going to be staying here at least for one more year. Panthers, look, they finished second in the league in sacks, but 29 of those sacks were registered by 4 guys. Gerald McCoy, Mario Addison, Bruce Irvin at defensive end, and Vernon Butler at defensive tackle. All of those guys are free agents. You could go with Derek Brown here, and that makes a lot of sense. Carolina, 14 interceptions, but Ross Cockrell, James Bradbury, and then safety Trey Boston, all free agents. Jeffrey Okudah makes sense. But when you're talking about having to replace a guy like Luke Kuechly, a 7-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first team All Pro, AP Defensive Player of the Year in 2013, averaged 137 tackles per game while also racking up 18 interceptions, 12 and a half sacks, and 7 forced fumbles in those 8 seasons with the Panthers. How do you replace that? You find a guy who can make plays all over the field, who can fill up the stat sheet, and that's exactly what Isaiah Simmons does. Matt Rule can build the defense around a linebacker like Isaiah Simmons. Arizona sitting at number 8, and as I mentioned, they did invest in 3 receivers in last year's draft with Andy Isabella, Hakeem Butler, and Keyshawn Johnson. But with Larry Fitzgerald coming back for one more year, do they still decide that they're going to look for a receiver, number 1 wideout in this year's draft? With the depth in this draft class, man, you can use this number 8 pick to get an offensive lineman, be able to solidify the front, and still get a really solid receiver sitting there in round number 2. Tristan Wirfs, to me, is the number 1 or number 2 offensive tackle in this year's draft. Can play guard and tackle, and to me, when you're looking at this, you've got Kyler Murray, a guy who was the AP Rookie of the Year, threw over 3,700 yards. A guy in Cliff Kingsbury's offense. You really have to make sure that you're taking care of this guy. And when you're looking at the offensive line, this offensive line just could not keep quarterbacks healthy. Gave up 50 or more sacks in each of the last 3 seasons. That's not good enough. DJ Humphries finally played an entire season. He'll be the left tackle. You need a right tackle. Tristan Wirfs has to be that guy. Unless they find something in free agency or through a trade. It's most likely going to be a trade because I think there aren't really any long-term options outside of Jack Conklin at the right tackle position. Jacksonville Jaguars, I had Isaiah Simmons potentially going here, but really Derek Brown makes a lot of sense. When you're talking about Marcel Darius possibly being a cap casualty, I think you're looking at Taven Bryan, who hasn't really gotten anything going. Avery Jones, the only defensive tackles currently on the roster. You got to improve the 28th ranked defense, and you got to really build it from within. Some people are talking about potentially going with an offensive lineman here. I think you can get someone on day 2, potentially an Austin Jackson, potentially Lucas Niang. There's some guys that are going to be out there on day 2 that you can end up targeting. I think you have to use this pick, get Derek Brown, solidify the interior of that line, and then look offensive line after that. Number 10, Cleveland Browns. If you say off anything other than an offensive lineman here, I think you're crazy. Because Baker Mayfield seemed to be running for his life. I think it was one of those things, too, when you watch Baker Mayfield, he was starting to flee and run away from the pocket, even when it wasn't there. He was traumatized, I guess you could say. It was ingrained in him to flee the pocket, to get out of there whenever possible, even when he didn't need to. And that's alarming. You had, Greg Robinson, who with his legal troubles, I think his career is over. Chris Hubbard at right tackle really struggled mightily as well. They've got to do an upgrade there along the offensive line, especially at tackle. And Mekhi Becton, Mount Becton. We talk about Mount McKinney with Bryant McKinney. I'm calling Mekhi Becton Mount Becton. Dane Brugler, a draft expert and a draft insider. I love the comparison that he had with Brugler to Bryant McKinney because of the size and the athleticism. Look, McKinney, despite being as big as he was, ran a 5.13 40. Well, Mekhi Becton at 6'7", 364 pounds, as I mentioned earlier, 5'10", 40. And Baker Mayfield is used to having a big, huge mammoth offensive tackle with Orlando Brown Jr. playing there for Oklahoma. And look, when you're talking about quarterbacks getting outside the pocket, Mekhi Becton played with Lamar Jackson while at Louisville. So he's used to having quarterbacks getting outside the pocket. That was a little bit of the game there with Scott Satterfield as well. So Mekhi Becton, ton of sense there for Cleveland sitting there at number 10. Number 11, New York Jets. Question's going to be, do they get Jack Conklin here? If they do, then you're not talking about Andrew Thomas. I think what the Jets are going to do, they could go C.J. Henderson to team with Tremaine Johnson. They could go with a corner like Logan Ryan, let's say, from the Patriots, and really solidify that need. You need to get a number one wideout. Robbie Anderson is going to be a free agent. I don't know that he's going to be back, but even if he is, you still need a number one guy for Sam Darnold. Jerry Jeudy should be that guy. I think, with the route running ability, I think Jerry Jeudy makes a ton of sense there for Sam Darnold. It could also be CeeDee Lamb. You're really kind of interchangeable with these two picks, but I think Jerry Jeudy to the Jets, and then the Raiders at number 12. I go with CeeDee Lamb. They need to finally find a replacement for Amari Cooper. Ultimately got traded to the Cowboys after 6 games in 2018. CeeDee Lamb going there, being the number one target for Derek Carr, or whoever is going to be the quarterback at the black hole there in Vegas. But CeeDee Lamb makes a lot of sense to be that number one target. Indianapolis Colts. There's talk that this could possibly a landing spot for, for Jameis Winston, potentially for Phillip Rivers. I think this could end up being the spot for Jordan Love when it's all said and done. I think it could be Phillip Rivers as kind of the stopgap. Play there for a couple of more years to end his career, and then Jordan Love really stepping in, allowing Frank Reich to really have a young quarterback that he can develop. I think Jordan Love is rising up draft boards, and I think this would be a good pick for him. Tampa Bay, you have Jameis, obviously the 5,000 yard mark. The only quarterback in the league to do that. Also, 33 touchdowns, but had 30 interceptions, had the LASIK surgery. We'll see how that does to help him out. So there's a talk about a possible quarterback there, but I think ultimately you have to look at improving the pass rush. I think Javon Kinlaw could potentially be the pick here. You have Ndamukong Suh, Bo Allen, Raheem Nunez, Roches, all free agents. That really leaves Vita Vea and Winston Golson as the only defensive lineman with any real experience. I'm looking at this, and Javon Kinlaw could be the pick. I'm going to say K'Lavon Chaisson, just because when you're talking about explosive pass rushers, there aren't a ton of them, as I mentioned earlier. Chaisson, I think, may end up getting the nod. Denver Broncos, they need an explosive receiver for Drew Lock. Cortland Sutton established himself as the top wideout, but he's not going to be someone who's really going to stretch defenses. You get that vertical speed, that vertical route, vertical runner for Drew Lock. He really excelled when he had a healthy Emmanuel Hall on the outside there at Mizzou. He was tossing dimes to that streaking receiver down the sideline. I think if they take Henry Ruggs here, I think you're going to see a lot of that for Denver. That's really going to open up things for Sutton on the opposite side. And then with the Falcons, Thomas Dimitroff, Dan Quinn, the type of player, that the model that they really look for in a defensive lineman, the speed and everything else. And I'm looking at one of two guys. I'm looking at either Chaisson if he's there, or if not, then it's going to be Javon Kinlaw. And the reason why I end up saying this is you look at the defensive tackle position, you got Grady Jarrett, but with Jack Crawford, Tyler Davison, Michael Bennett all set to become free agents. It's just Jarrett and Deidre Sanat. You get a guy like Javon Kinlaw in there. The explosiveness, as an interior pass rusher, I think would be nice in terms of a compliment for a guy like Takk McKinley. Hasn't really lived up to that first round billing. I think if Chaisson's there, he's going to be the guy. If he's off the board, then obviously you're going to be looking at Kinlaw. Vic Beasley, Adrian Claiborne, they combined for 12 of the team's 28 sacks. They're hitting the free agency. Beasley may end up being a casualty there. And Atlanta, they've struggled a little bit with, a couple of the pass rushers that they've brought in, Takk McKinley, the latest, who just hasn't lived up to the billing just yet. So Chaisson, do they go there? Do they end up going, Kinlaw? I think at the end of the day, if Chaisson's there, he's the guy. But for the purposes of this mock draft, I'm going with Javon Kinlaw there. So we've gotten through the combine. We've gotten through the first half of my first round. We'll go ahead and take a look at the rest of my first round in next week's podcast. We'll also start dabbling a little bit into round number 2 and what that might look like. We're also going to start seeing how some of the positions are taking shape for the draft. We've got a little bit of time before we actually hit the draft. Again, April 23rd is when the draft is going to begin. So we still have a lot of time. We have the entire month of March. We have all the guys' pro days to really see how things take shape, and obviously free agency. When we hit free agency, that's really where a lot of the podcasts are going to run. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have another podcast out to you in the next few days, really covering, once I get the rest of my mock draft out there and post it on the website, we'll go ahead and do another podcast. And then, like I said, as we get going, as I do every year, we're going to get fast and furious with these podcasts, releasing multiple each week, really wanting to make sure that you're ready for this draft. And as things change, we want to make sure that we're getting things up to date and really bringing the best coverage that I can for you. I've watched over 200 games beginning to end during the season. And I feel like, I know these players, a lot of the analysis that I've done is kind of off the cuff, off the top of my head with a lot of my research that I've done. I've got a lot of my notes, and really that's what I'm going to kind of go back to, is really taking a look at the notes when I'm putting together my mock draft for the website. So I hope you tune in. Hope you check out some of the content. I'll let you know when the website is updated with my latest mock draft. Hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. We'll do this all again next week. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your week next week. We'll do this all again in just a few days. So for readyforthedraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast, the post-combine edition. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. And until next time, I am out of here.